All right, everybody, welcome to LPC today. The very last LPC of the session. Woohoo! Woo!
Way too much excitement.
That is a lot of excitement. I'm Krista Hinton. I'm from Santa Clara City Council. I'm your first VP for the league. First thing I do is look for a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting on February 23rd. Motion to approve from Mayor Tran. Do I have a second? Second right here, from Mayor from Hooper, and all in favor? Hooper, sorry. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. I will turn over the time to Cameron. That's what I thought, or whoever's going first.
I don't know. Cam, are you going to go first, or did you want? I can't even get the slides to change, so there we go. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So last week of session, things are going to move very quickly this week. Our upcoming LPC is TBD. We will let you know if we meet in May or June. Just don't come next Monday because we won't be here. A few other upcoming events to remind you of. We've got our NLC CCC conference in DC in a couple of weeks. Thank you all of you who have reached out and let us know if you're going to that one. We have a lot of spring trainings coming up. We'll obviously put those emails out, and then we'll get those topics nailed down. And then April 22nd to 24th, our mid-year conference in St. George, which Sean Guzman has personally guaranteed will have good weather. All right, we want to first thank everyone who's been part of the morning briefing crew. A lot of you have spent a lot of time with us. This is a picture just from this morning of a lot of folks in there as we talk through all the things that are happening in committees that day. So thanks to everyone who's been a part of that. It's great to be able to check in on a daily basis with those of you who are able about the bills that are coming up in committee. We've had a lot of other good opportunities throughout the session, meeting with the speaker, meeting with the president. We've had some great testimonies from our officers here. You can see Mayor Walker, Mayor Bradshaw, Councilman Hinton, who have all had opportunities to testify in committee, and they've made a difference. We've seen some big changes based on those testimonies in the outreach. Big thanks to everyone for reaching out on local administrative advisor. When the funding sheet came out last Friday that shows what should ultimately end up in the bill, the $500,000 ongoing was on that list, so the LAA funding should be restored. Yes, that is applause worthy. UDOT technical assistance one-time cut, did not cut the community advisor program, so that's another one. So all in all, the technical assistance did really well this last week. We'll watch for the final bill that comes out at the end of this week, but we're in a better place than we've been on those the last few years. So I want to talk about bill data, or data, however you want to say it. I don't judge, but I can't get the slide to move, so there is no data. Maybe. Am I controlling this or just go away? There is no bill data. That is the takeaway right now because it's frozen. Oh, it just jumped like 3 things. It just caught up. I hit that thing like 10 times and it just decided to move. All right, so we've talked about this. We've shown this graph a lot this session. There are 1,010 bills introduced this session. That's a record. That's that red line up at the top. If it feels like there are more bills out there than ever before, it's because there are factually more bills out there than ever before. That being said, the number of bills being passed, if you look at that red line on the bottom there, is pretty close to the same rate as previous years and down a little bit. So more bills are out there than ever before, but they are not passing more bills than ever before just yet. They have plenty of time to do work this week. But so there will certainly be a lot of bills that just don't end up going anywhere by the end of the week. Which ones those will be is still have to see. We've had our 6 LPC meetings this year so far, 42 Slido questions that we've asked you, and 6,395 total Slido responses. Just so you know, we do review all of those responses. We go through them with the officers every week, so thank you for all the input you give us. It does make a big difference as we're advocating and deciding where to go with different positions. And then legislative updates. So Cassidy put this together. Our open rates are higher than they have been before. So we're sending you a lot of emails and you're opening those emails. So our open rate is higher than we've seen in previous years. Was it 700 more than you said this year? 1% lower, but okay, so we have 700 more people opening our emails than before, even though our open rate is slightly down. So there's more of you opening the emails, even though the percentage has gone down. So we broadened the base and lowered the rate. You're welcome. That's how geeky we are up here. All right, I'm gonna jump right into elections. Oh, I don't even have a title slide for that one. That was fun. All right, elections. So this bill, HB 479, just passed out of the House. We've talked about this one multiple times, literally just passed out of the House 20 minutes ago. Many of you did a great job reaching out to your legislators over the course of this past week, both in committee and on the floor. We expected this to pass out of the House. And there's no question this was a leadership priority in the House. For a leadership priority bill, it only passed 42 to 30. It was not an overwhelming majority, and there was plenty of people within both parties who voted against this bill. One of the things that the sponsor has repeatedly said, our big concern has been on the fiscal impact of having additional drop boxes and additional poll workers. Those kick into place in 2027, which will be a fiscal hit to our municipalities. We've brought that up repeatedly. The sponsor has said there will be funding available. I'm in the trust but verify camp, and my trust may not even be that high right there. I will say in my history working in elections, which is a while now, I've never seen municipal elections ever get extra funding. I've seen counties get funding. I've seen the state get funding. I've never seen municipal elections get some extra funding, so I'm a little bit hesitant on that one. So here's what I want you to do. Here's my ask. If you're concerned about this funding, it's moved out of the House to the Senate. We're on the last week of the session. I would let your senators know right now. Like, pick up your phone as we're sitting here and let them know the House just passed out HB 479, election code modifications, and that we remain concerned about the fiscal impact to cities and towns over this bill. This will almost certainly make, not all of you, but many of you, add additional poll workers and additional drop boxes during election season. So if you're fine with the fiscal impact, great, you can eat that money. That's on you. But if you're concerned about this funding, I would reach out to your senators and flag this one for them now. Now, a few procedural things. Tomorrow is the last day for each body to pass their own bills. So House bills have to be passed by the House tomorrow. Senate bills have to be passed by the Senate tomorrow. The last 3 days of session, they will be passing the other body's bills. So that means this bill will not show up on the calendar until Wednesday or Thursday, perhaps. But it could show up in committee before then, because we do have some committees tomorrow afternoon and then Wednesday morning. So again, I would reach out to your senators and let them know you have concerns about the fiscal impacts of this bill. The feedback I received back from the weekend was that many of you had reached out. Several senators said, we're working on this one. We understand the concerns. And so I do expect to see some changes on this one, but let's keep making sure they're aware of that. So any questions on that? Okay, beautiful. Moving on. So Slido question. Let's pull this one out right out of the gate. So I already asked you to pull out your phones and text your senators. So you can finish texting them. That's more important, actually. But then grab that QR code up there on Slido. And then we want to know, how high of a priority is it for ULCT to oppose HB 479? I'm going to give you a minute to answer that. No, not here. We only have one online polling place for this. Thank you for all the clever comments. The last week in that session, my filter goes down and my tolerance for clever comments also goes down. And my tolerance for not clever comments goes down even more. If you're going to make a clever comment, at least be clever. Not saying yours aren't, Mayor. All right, we're going to leave this up for just a second more. And we do have a couple more bills to talk about in this space. Look at all these slide responses coming in. We have not put you to sleep yet. All right, I'm going to give this 5 more seconds.
Does this still have the runway to after the next?
There's still some runway, yeah, in this bill. So HB 300 last year put in several runways. A lot of the things go into effect in 2029. The drop box and poll worker provisions, the way I read it and the way the drafting attorney reads it, because I asked him, kick into place in 2027. So the drop box provision will hit our elections first.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, the sponsor has said this goes into place in 2029, and I think he's reading his bill wrong. And I asked the drafting attorney, and he agreed with me. All right, moving on. Here's one we have not talked about yet because it dropped just this last week after LPC. So this SB 321, what this bill does is requires municipal candidates to file a campaign finance report by January 10th of each year until your account is zero. Right now, you have a requirement to file a report 30 days after the election, and you don't have any more reporting requirements. Those requirements kick back into place the next time you run. What this bill is seeking to do is match state and legislative candidate requirements. So right now, if you run for state office or legislative office, you do have to file a report every January 10th until you can show that your account fund balance is at zero. The idea behind this one is that it's a transparency bill, obviously, that says we really don't know what municipal candidates are doing with their funds from election to election. So this will require some additional reporting. This will require clerks and recorders to take additional reports and follow up with that. It also clarifies what you can do with municipal funds. This is already current law. This just kind of clarifies it. But for campaign funds, if you're trying to get rid of them, you can donate them to a 501c3 charitable organization. You can return the money to donors, including yourself, if you loaned money to your campaign, or you can make other lawful political donations. So you could donate it to other candidates or other PACs or whatever you want to do with that one. This bill's already been moving forward. Just want to take any questions or comments on this one. We have position pending because we haven't had a chance to talk about this one yet. Questions or comments? Yeah.
As a former state official, I fall under this and every year do my little report. It takes about 30 seconds, maybe 90. Just not a big deal if for some reason you finished office and you wanted to keep some money in the war chest just so that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if you want to do something different with it, you could. So hasn't been a big deal for former state officials, and I don't think it'd be a big deal for former municipal either.
I will tell you as the former state elections director, and this is none of you in this room. I'm looking around the room really quick. Okay, none of you in this room. There's some pretty wild stories of what people have done with campaign funds, particularly in the municipal world, because there aren't a lot of reporting requirements on it. And I'm sure all of you are following the law perfectly, but the people from like 10 years ago were doing some really weird stuff. Not all of them, just a few. But so anyway, if anyone has some major concerns with this or a really good argument against it, I'm open to hearing those.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just another step that I think is something else to remember, that in a municipal level, sometimes you forget, but my question or reason to oppose, what's the penalty if you don't?
So that's
Prior to the election, you could lose your seat if you don't file.
in this case, it's a
Afterwards,
fine.
Yeah, and they don't even have that defined, so.
So actually, it's a $250 fine in the bill. And I meant to put that on the slide. And I apologize, I didn't. But so there's a fine on this one. But again, this is, like Mike said, this is what state and legislative candidates are doing right now as well, sometimes for years. If you get your fund balance to zero, so I know which many of you end at zero anyway, so this is not going to be difficult, then there's no reporting requirement. You just have to show the funds are taken care of, and then you're done. Actually, you can use campaign funds to pay a fine. That is a thing. Good question. Yep.
Is it retroactive at all or just going?
Nope,
forward?
not retroactive, just going forward. Yeah, great question. Yeah, this would not be going back. This should just be starting next round. So that is a good question. Yep, questions online.
Thank you. Would the fee also apply to candidates that are not elected and don't ever submit their final disclosure?
Yes. So this applies to anybody running for municipal office. So I will say, so if someone loses and they're not in office, they still have to file this as well, or they can be under penalty of the fine.
And then who collects the fine?
City would collect the fine. What's that? Do you want to make a motion?
I'll give a pro argument. Since we run every 4 years, if you end up with any amount of money left in your campaign account, I have roughly $400 left in my campaign account from last election cycle. I did a dumb thing and then I allowed it to be in an interest checking account, which means if I do nothing, this amount will change and grow for the next 4 years. If I buy pizza for the youth council, I can buy it out of this account. But
Mhm.
4 years from now is the next time I intend to file a report. I think there is probably some positive transparency in making sure that at year end, you know, we've kept track of how these funds are used and that there's a public reporting mechanism. To me, it always has struck me as odd that there is reporting at the state level and at the county commission level in between election cycles for candidates, but there isn't on our end.
Mhm.
To me, this is an easy one to say we should probably be neutral because, you know, we hold in positions in the public trust and making sure that those campaign funds are used for only the specific purposes outlined in law makes sense.
Justin, if I can also add a comment similar to Mayor Bradshaw's, from the staff's perspective, this will certainly add a level of work.
Mhm.
The recorder will have to have another communication and candidates and elected officials will have to report. It's hard to argue against the transparency though. And if it matches what the state's doing, I don't know that they're going to have much appetite to listen to us in terms of the complaints that we may give them or the reasons why we don't want to do it because it matches what they're doing. So it's hard to oppose. There are a couple of comments online that I also agree with. So maybe this is when we say you can do it.
So will the property shared equally amongst
We're
us and
ignoring
them?
Mark right now. You can.
Thanks. Will they also share
Mute Mark.
We should
a
mute
parallel
those
path
Mute
on
Mark's
property
microphone.
tax and fund balance?
Oh, save for property tax later, Mark. All right. We got one more back here. I think saw one more hand.
Hey, keep the train on the rails.
Is there an affirmative duty on the recorder to go out and enforce it, or just if problems are reported to them after? Because they'll get the reports annually.
The reporter would
they
need,
look-
yeah, the recorder would need to get the reports annually. If someone didn't file the report, then yeah, they would put out that fine. I tell you, this is part of what I used to do in my job for the state. It was super fun. Especially when you have like 500 candidates in the state. Yeah, Councilmember right here.
Someone asked this, I don't know if you heard it, but I didn't hear an answer to it. So if the city is collecting the fine, the city keeps that fine?
Yes, city would keep the fine, yes. Yeah, I think, yeah, if I didn't answer that, yes, the city would keep the fine. And then you can buy the youth council pizza. All right, we're going to move on to the next one because we have a lot of bills to get through, as always. This is another one that we're pending on because this is another bill that, first off, this is a 600 level bill. We're over 600 bills in the House. I've never seen over 600 bills in the House, and neither has anybody else. But still, we're talking about a 604 bill. So this is HB 604, Local Government Official Amendments. This bill passed out of committee this morning, so it'll be on the House floor. What it says is a state executive branch official or a county official may not serve on a municipal legislative body. Those are defined there below. A county official means the elected county executive and county manager, whether hired or appointed. So county manager could not serve on the city council. State executive branch official, which is also down below. So member of the governor's cabinet, any executive director, director, or division director working the state executive branch, or any paid advisor to the governor could not serve on the city council. That's what the bill does. Thoughts or questions? I'm not sure what we want to do with this one. This does not impact a lot of people.
Justin,
Yeah.
my understanding is the representative was angry at a member of the governor's staff who is also on a county council who opposed one of his bills, and this is retaliatory. But the effective date is after said county council member's term is finished, so I don't know if it applies to anybody.
And that was the next part, so thank you, Mike. Does not apply to anyone who currently meets this definition until the next election, 2027. So yes, there are, I can think of 3 people this would impact right now. I can think of 2 others it would have impacted in the last 15, 16 years. But yeah, thoughts or comments?
Justin, if I could, It is against the International City Manager, County Manager form of Code of Ethics, as well as the state Utah City Manager Association ethics to be in this position. So I think that we probably should support those professional organizations and support this bill.
Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question. It doesn't prohibit a state official from serving in a county position.
It does. I just didn't put that on here because I don't care.
Thank you.
That's a UAC problem. I don't care about that part of the bill. So yes, it is on there. Thanks for asking. But in the interest of shorter slides and non-county issues, it's not on there. I told you no filter at this point. I expect this bill will move through. I don't know if we're to support a neutral or otherwise. My thought would be to land it neutral on this one. I don't necessarily see a reason to go all the way to support on it because there is a limitation, which is a little odd, but it also doesn't have a massive impact either. So any other questions? Because we do have a lot of other things to get through. All right. So I'm going to ask you the question. How high of a priority is it for ULCT to engage on HB 604? Up next. All right, I'm going to leave this open for about 10 more seconds.
Justin, you have an online question.
Mhm.
So concerning a governor's appointment, does it give a timeline for someone to fill their elected spot? So if someone were to be appointed by the governor to something else and they were.
That's a great question. Yeah. So if someone were appointed to serve in the governor as an advisor or in the cabinet, then a regular there wouldn't be a specific timeline laid out in this. It would just fall under regular vacancy rules. So that is a very good question. All right, we're going to jump off this and give it to Molly for homelessness.
Hello. Last week we had a good chat about HB 596 and that there were some provisions in 596 we did not care for. 596, kind of independent of our concerns, really has 4 aims. The first is the fact that this April, funding and statutory permission for a bunch of beds expires. So we are looking at the potential of hundreds of beds no longer being in the homeless services system, which means that those people using those services would likely be out on the street experiencing unsheltered homelessness in your communities. Second, it's trying to make it more flexible for service providers to get their funding. Right now, they're only funded on a reimbursement basis, and this would allow for forward payments. It creates the county matching fund to try to incentivize counties to take a bigger role in the service space. And then it also creates some more flexibility for Code Blue. Those are really the big goals of the bill. Last week, we were chatting that there were a lot of provisions in HB 596 that we did not care for. And we were trying to negotiate how we would engage with the bill and whether we wanted to work with the bill as drafted or pursue a substitute. As Seth put it, the bridge over troubled water. And I think we actually, through negotiation, have been able to land in a much better space compared to the original version of the bill. So the original version of the bill preempted every single shelter city to dictate that they could not determine their shelter capacity. Only the state could determine shelter capacity. It also would have forced West Valley, who's volunteered to have a winter shelter for the past few years, that's been de facto operating as a year-round shelter, to turn into a permanent shelter. We were able to negotiate provisions so that both of those land use decisions are optional and require the consent of the hosting municipalities. Additionally, the bill originally imagined a 15% mitigation increase for beginning this summer, followed by over the 2-year period, what would be about an 82 to 96% mitigation increase, which was a pretty steep incline. We were able to negotiate that we're going to do a one-time 15% assessment into the mitigation fund of local dollars and create a task force moving forward that looks into all things mitigation. That task force will consist of members of the league, both shelter cities and non-shelter cities, as well as the new homeless service coordinator and a member of league staff who works on this issue. We'll see who that one is. One thing I want to flag is that the bill does return with the amendment that passed in committee this morning, it does return the mitigation contributions to that 2.55% or $275,000 beginning in 2027. I want to flag for everyone that based on, that will be a bit of a nebulous concept based on what the task force does, because they will be making recommendations about what those contributions should be. And so while that is in statute right now, I would say treat it tentatively because we don't exactly know what that task force will arrive at. Additionally, it really tried to provide more flexibility for service providers with Code Blue. It increases it to 25 degrees and provides service providers with a little bit more flexibility to operate a Code Blue if it is called, but if that temperature doesn't necessarily transpire. So for example, if I say on Wednesday, we're going to have Code Blue, but it's actually a couple degrees warmer, it's been harder for the service providers to plan for it than not do it. So gives them the flexibility that says if it's anticipated, they can still provide that, even if the temperature is off by a couple degrees. And then it also looks, the original bill had a pretty expansive code red that it was implementing. It was a mirror of a bill that Senator Weiler ran last year that was kind of the mirror image of Code Blue right now. We heard a lot of concerns about that from folks, and so we were able to really narrowly tailor that so that it permits the St. George shelter to expand their capacity in the summer, but it doesn't mandate that anyone else do anything else. And then finally, as I mentioned, West Valley has been operating effectively as a year-round shelter for about 3 years now, but they have only been recognized as a winter shelter. So they have continued to pay into the fund and have not been getting really many mitigation dollars at all. And so this also creates a recognition that if a shelter is online for 365 days or more, it is recognized as a year-round shelter, even if it originally comes online as a piece of winter response. Those are really the key provisions as they impact municipalities and as they differ from the original bill and what passed through committee today. Are there any questions, comments, concerns about this bill as it is currently drafted?
This bill, all the players.
Thank you. Oh, please don't do that. Thank you all. Mayor Gettle.
Yes, well, Mayor Bradshaw stole my thunder there, but I wanted to thank Molly especially. This was a big, big lift for the league, and you made a bad bill less bad, and for some cities, it's actually pretty good. I wanted to just recognize also West Valley City, as you said, they have been operating as a tier 1 shelter for several years now. And we're so glad that once this passes, that they'll finally be recognized as a tier 1 shelter and not have to continue to pay in and also provide shelter services. So I see some other shelter city mayors here in the audience, Mayor Zoltansky, Mayor Wood. I'm sure we all just thank you for the heavy lift this was. This came up kind of late in the session, but it's something we've all been discussing throughout the entire year so far. So thank you for all your efforts, Molly.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments about the provisions in the bill?
Molly, I join in commending you and your efforts. And I also want to thank the bill sponsors, Representative Yellison. Very collaborative process, a lot of work with the shelter cities. And then also want to thank the non-shelter cities for agreeing to enhance their contributions. It should be really the easiest check any non-shelter city could write in a year. It's such important work when the shelter cities are carrying a load. It eases the burden on non-shelter cities. So it shows the strength of all of the cities working together. Want to thank Sean, Molly for your testimony, Mayor Wood this morning, and all the service providers. It was a great hearing. So if you have a chance to go back and watch it, if you didn't see it in live time, it was a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else? Are there any questions? Is anyone confused about what we're embarking upon? All right. So I had this on the first slide, but given all of the red lines that we submitted, the sponsor pretty much took every single red line we submitted on this bill. We suggest moving to a neutral position as a league on this. Again, the bottom line, it has increased capacity that's optional for existing shelter cities. West Valley is recognized as a shelter city while still maintaining their land use authority. We do have a one-time 15% mitigation assessment. We create the mitigation task force. Code Blue is increased to 25 degrees, and Code Red only applies to the St. George shelter. All right. Boy, howdy. What a bill. So as we are now looking to transition to this mitigation task force, we want to know how important is mitigation policy, both contributions and distributions to your city. There's no right or wrong answer. I know that we have some, based on the interviews I've done, we have some cities who care a lot. We have some cities who don't care at all. That's okay. We're just trying to get a sense of where our members are as we likely embark on this new task force.
Molly, just one more comment. I think it's been kind of fun to shower you with some praise and make you maybe get a little bit embarrassed.
I don't care for it.
Which is why I'm going to keep talking. One of my favorite moments of the session happened this morning is Representative Elison was talking about the bill and was asked a pretty significant question, and he turned and said, "I want to have Molly come up and answer the question." And I think that highlighted the work that you've done and the complexity of this. I think part of the reason you get a lot of looks from us, and we're looking at you the same way as they are from the other side, it's because it is so complex and there's so much about this that we don't understand. On this particular question, I loved Representative Elison's response as he was describing how some cities say, we don't care about this. And then he says, well, do you want to have a shelter in your city? Oh, okay, now we care about it. So I think this is a really good question to understand that wherever we are in whatever type of city, these questions are important. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you, Seth. All right, thank you all. We're going to hop along to Rev and Tax.
All right, welcome everybody. It's awesome to see a packed house for the last LPC of the session. Yes, there are only 4.5 business days to go, but it might as well be a month with everything that still has to happen across the finish line. We're going to talk taxes, and by just a show of hands in the room, how many of you have contacted your legislator over the last few days related to taxes? Okay, that is awesome. So those online, I welcome you putting in line or in the chat room if you did as well. Cassidy, how many people are online? 290 plus I count maybe 3 or 4 empty seats in the room. So thank you everybody for your participation in LPC and for your involvement in the legislative process throughout the session here. That's another 400 plus member day. What Carson has pulled up on the screen is a document that we are working on right now. I was hoping it would be ready for prime time to hand out today at LPC. It's not quite ready for prime time because we're still working on red lines, but it's an effort to start to spell out what does truth and taxation process look like yesterday, and then what is truth and taxation going to look like starting this spring. So on this document, you'll see, can I scan it? This computer, okay. So the stuff that's highlighted is the stuff we're still working on red lines. We're working throughout the weekend trying to get the red lines correct. And then it'll break down, and Cassidy will actually make this look much more user-friendly. This was my creation, not hers. But what it starts to break down is what does HB 236 require? What will HB 365 require if it passes? What has SB 238 clarified from last year's process? And then we've been in conversations with the tax commission about building out a new checklist so that we can hopefully avoid some of the tripwires that we had last year during the truth and taxation process. So I met with them last Thursday to start building out checklists in that way. So again, this isn't quite ready because we don't want to give you something and then say, never mind, the red lines have now been updated. But this just gives you a sense of how we've been trying to track all the moving pieces so that it all sings in harmony once the legislature ends on Friday. Okay. So with that as background there, Carson, we can switch it back over to the slides. Let's give an update of where we're at on the bills. And I appreciate the shout outs that have happened thus far. I want to thank the property tax work group. I've had a few people who said, have the legislators even listened to local government on property tax? And the answer is, Mayor Palmer, is it fair to say, like every day we've been in conversations with legislators. Mayor Palmer, Mayor Walker, Mayor Bradshaw, and I mean, between the four of us, at least two of us have had almost daily meetings with legislators on property tax based on all the feedback we've been getting via slide on the meetings. And then appreciate all these folks who attended at least one property tax meeting over the last couple of months of our internal property tax meetings. It's possible I may have missed some names. I was going through this from memory last night, but just trying to make sure that we had feedback from lots of different folks as we've been working through all of these different bills. So thank you to all of those individuals, electeds, and staff and otherwise. So SB 97, we're just going to jump right to the second sub and the third sub. The second sub came out Friday during the lunch hour. Several of your city managers were on our weekly city manager call when it came out and did not have the language that we were anticipating. So let me start with what was good about the second sub. The second sub removed the 5% cap on property tax increases. It removed the property tax reduction based on interest earnings, which was part of the action alert that we sent on Thursday. Changed the new growth definition, and this is something that has changed in every draft, and that's not even the public drafts. Roger, is it fair to say we've probably gone through 10 definitions on this piece? Yeah, and we've worked very closely with the Association of Counties and their assessors and auditors as we've been working through the new growth definitions, including as recently as this morning, we confirmed with UAC that the language that's in the third substitute reflects the language that we've been working on for the last few weeks. And then being able to count new growth as 100%. We brought this up about a month ago at LPC, but there have been examples where new growth was being counted as 40% one year and 100% the next for a total of 140 instead of 40% and 60% for a total of 100. And the language in here is trying to get to that. On the TBD side, this was something that we had not taken a position on one way or the other, but it changes the residential exemption for rental properties. So instead of paying on 55% of your taxable value, you would pay on 60% of your taxable value. So we put that in the TBD camp because we've never weighed in one way or the other on that piece, but that piece is in the second sub. And then the bad part about the second sub was that it changed the municipal fund balance in a significant and dramatic way. As a reminder, we've talked about this before LPC multiple times this session, towns can have a fund balance up to 100% of their general fund. Cities up to 35%. That went up 6 years ago, right? From 25 to 35. The second sub would have tied your fund balance back to your annual property tax revenue. So let me just give you a couple of really dramatic examples. Do I have West Haven in the room or online? I don't see anybody from West Haven in the room, but they're usually online. West Haven currently does not collect a property tax. So under the second substitute, West Haven would go from being able to have 35% of their general fund and fund balance to the equivalent of property tax. Anybody want to do the math for me if you don't collect a property tax? Exactly. Lyman Town. So this, I want to thank Carrie Nakamura for helping us track down this data. Lyman Town would go from 100% fund balance to 1% fund balance, actually 0.8% fund balance. So we rounded up for conversation purposes, which means their fund balance would max out at about $4,000, $4,200 annually. Okay. And then every city is somewhere on that scale. So the data that you've provided to us through the session about your fund balance, your general fund, interest earnings, all of that, we've been sharing that with senators. And then your calls made a huge difference. I'll just give two quick anecdotes. I was meeting with a senator on another issue but I knew the data for his city. So after we finished that issue, I said, have you heard from your city on SB 97? He said, yes, help me understand why this matters. There's a Utah County city. I said, this is what this Utah County city's fund balance is today. This is their budget. Your bill would force them to cut their fund balance by 80% this year. He said, we don't want to do that. I said, then don't. Okay. Then I had a conversation with another senator who said, we think as a Senate caucus that governments in general, state, county, city, school districts, et cetera, have more in fund balance than they ought to have. He said, but SB 97 second sub, I see why you guys are concerned. And can you guys figure something out that's reasonable? I'll support something that's reasonable. And I said 2 anecdotes. Here's my third one. We had one senator who, I got a copy of this text. Every text he got from his cities, he immediately copied and pasted and forwarded to Senator McKay and said, fix this. So my point is, the advocacy made a huge difference. And to Senator McKay's credit, that was Friday at lunch is when that sub came out. And within an hour, Mayor Palmer, Mayor Bradshaw, and I were with Senator McKay walking back through what SB 97 needed to look like in order for the league not to oppose it. That's where we are now. The third substitute, folks, it dropped, I guess, an hour ago now. The senator uncircled it, adopted it, and circled it because he knew we were meeting right now at LPC. So I appreciate him doing that. So now you can consider what the bill says and not just take our word for it. So the third sub's primary changes are in the municipal fund balance piece. Towns stay the same. So you're back to that 100%. So Lyman Town doesn't drop down to 1%. For cities, current law is 35%. What the bill now contemplates is a 5-year runway for fund balances to come slightly down. Okay. For a city whose general fund is below 25 million, you need to go from 35 to 30. For a city with a general fund between 25 and 49, needs to come down to 28%. And a city with general fund of 50 million plus, it comes down to 25% over the next 5 years. Now, as a reminder, when we did the survey work with you over the last month, we got feedback from 91 cities and towns, and about half of those cities and towns are above 30% right now. So this will result in cities having to make some decisions about your fund balances. But you have a 5-year runway in order to do it. And there was a lot of conversation about whether there should be restrictions on your capital projects fund. This language is silent on any restrictions around the reserves in your capital projects fund. The last thing I'll note that I didn't get to add to the slide because I was quickly typing the slide while we were presenting here is that it also adds language that come July 1st, 2031. So again, 5 years from now, if you're over the limit, right now under current law, it just shows up in your audit report and then you can make an adjustment. Come 2031, if you're above that limit, then whatever you're above that limit would be deducted from your certified tax rate. But again, that's 5 years from now. And I anticipate, based on the conversations we had with Senator McKay on Friday afternoon, this bill is the first of more bills to come on all things fund balance and tax related in the off season. Okay, that's our presentation. You can see that our recommendation was to still oppose the second sub, and he heard that message loud and clear on Friday. The third sub reflects what we discussed with him about the sliding scale, which when we surveyed LPC about the sliding scale, you were more comfortable with the sliding scale than you were with just the straight number. And so that's why we ended up on this sliding scale. And he wanted to go below the 25%. And we said, absolutely not. Like, we can reset to what it was before COVID, but we weren't going to go down below what it had been before COVID.
Cameron, Mike Winder, Mill Creek, quick question on, is that calculated based on what their fund was the previous year or any sort of running average? And the reason why is I look in the case of Mill Creek, and our budget was, say, 37 million one year, but shot to 67 the next year because of a bond, and then it will go back down to more. So is it a 5-year rolling? Is it just what the immediate year was?
It's the same language that's in code now, which should, if memory serves, it's the year before. I'll pull it up. I left my computer over there. So
okay.
Carson or Roger, can you just double check that? But I believe it's the same as what's in law right now. and it's just a percentage based on the previous year. But they'll double check that. Councilmember Jacob, here comes the mic.
Okay, there we go. How does this affect cities that split out their public safety into a separate service district and it's not in their general fund?
No, a good question. And this actually had a lot of questions about how enterprise funds are counted. So again, the key here is it's tied to your general fund, not to your overall budget. So it would not include those other types of enterprise funds or special districts. And again, current law right now is 35% tied to general fund. So we were trying not to change that calculation. It was just the percentage of that calculation. And Roger and Carson, I'm looking to you guys to, I'm right? Yeah, so the policy of how it's calculated is not changing, just the percentage. Yeah, that's what I thought. Lynn?
Yeah, Lynn Pace, Sandy City. So does Senate Bill 97 address anything on property tax, or is it shifted just to fund balance?
Yeah, good question, Lynn. So it still includes the new growth language that we've been working on with the Association of Counties, which, again, I confirmed with my counterpart at UAC this morning that the language in the third substitute matches what they were expecting for how to calculate new growth. Likewise, it still has the residential exemption change. So in that regard, it's property tax. But the cap and the interest pieces, which were problematic for us based on all of our survey results through the session, have been stripped out.
Cam,
So I heard my name.
back here.
Okay, so
Seth
Seth,
Perrins.
and then we'll go JJ.
Seth Perrin, Spanish Fork City. To what we were talking about, this is a major change in a good way, right? We're not talking about caps. We're not talking about voter approvals. Now we're talking about fund balance. There's a couple of things about this that I think we're going to need to work on between now and 2031. As I think about the process for the end of the fiscal year, we don't know our numbers, sales tax revenues, maybe building permits until July, August. That then gets applied back to the previous fiscal year. So getting to the exact percent is always tricky. I was sharing in a previous meeting that I try to guess, and I'm within 3% or so every year, which is not a great streak, right? So I might be at 28%. So I have the possibility of having some of my property tax clawed back the next year. So that I think is problematic, but I think we have time to work on that. Second of all, it seems like it might actually not be workable because I get my CTR, my certified tax rate, in June. And those notices have gone out. So I don't know how well the concept will actually work anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
So I think as we work with some of our senators, this is in a much better spot for the issues that we've been talking about. I don't know that piece really works quite yet, and it's certainly worth pushing on.
Perfect. Thank you, Seth.
Yep.
JJ.
Just wondering, it is on, okay. On the piece that deals with the change to the exemption on rental property, can you speak to the senator's intent there?
Yeah.
And why renters should pay a higher property tax rate?
Sure, I'll let Roger address that as he works his way up here. And I know there is a significant amount of opposition to that provision. So while it hasn't been our provision in the bill, there's still pushback from other stakeholders and senators on that provision.
Oh, week 2 of the session, Senator McKay convened a group of those of us who've been around a long time. I'll just say really old guys that worked on this stuff. And he basically on his own raised the question of saying, because there had been the issue of raising the residential exemption in another bill, the debate on that issue. He said, well, I'm a landlord and I don't think rental property should get this exemption. And he took it to 0. In his original bill, that's what it was. So this is a personal issue with him. He'll have to defend it because none of us recommended it. I know there are arguments about certain types of rental properties are different than others. This is basically, unless it's owner occupied, it's rental. I mean, it's a pretty dang broad definition. And, so if you're asking for motivation, talk to Dan McKay, because that was his thing.
Yeah. So I'll add a little more color to this. So Senator John Johnson ran a bill that didn't get out of the committee a couple of weeks ago. What, instead of attacking the issue around corporate ownership through the property tax, he instead wanted to focus on authorizing a new excise tax that the state would levy, and that excise tax would go on corporate-owned housing. He had a definition for that. And then that money could go into an infrastructure pot to help local government. It was an interesting idea. Like I said, it did not pass out of committee, but he was trying to address the issue of corporate-owned housing. And in his case, he had a threshold, which if memory serves, I think was an owner who owned more than 25 units. Don't quote me on the exact number, but it was something like that. From Senator McKay's perspective, in my conversations with him, he said, I want to incentivize ownership. I want to disincentivize rental properties. So this is a way we could do it by changing property tax. There's always been the question of whether or not it's allowed under the Constitution to make this change in statute.
Yeah, I would say it's an intriguing question, because my view of the constitutional provision, which many years ago I wrote, was that you had two categories of property. You had everybody's property, and then you had an exemption for residential property. He is carving out a double-edged, either it's two categories of residential property, or he's creating a third category, which is not allowed in the Constitution. But like I said, he talked to none of us about this issue. And I would say this bill's a long ways from home.
Yeah, but
That's not our fight. He's everything we asked for, he's.
yeah. So our recommendation is staff, recognizing we've been pushing back on this bill really since November, because the first version of this bill went through the November Revenue Tax Committee. We opposed it there. When it came over to the main session, we opposed it in Senate committee, and we've been opposing it basically nonstop since then on these different concepts. Our recommendation, based on where we are now and in the conversations we've had with senators, is to go neutral on the third sub with the stipulations that Seth raised of whether it's in this bill or a future bill over the next 5 years to try to address those other pieces. And part of the thought process on the recommendation is collectively, we hammered the Senate really, really hard. And I think senators, based on the conversations that we've had up here, you have senators that are looking for a reasonable alternative to the second sub. And what you have before you is a reasonable alternative to the second sub with the third sub, and recognize the conversation's going to continue going forward, because right now the fund balance language is on is on counties, cities, and towns. He couldn't quite figure out what he wanted to do on the school district front. And so that's going to be an interim study item, is looking at fund balances of school districts and special districts and other entities. So I thought I saw one other hand. Oh, is there right in front of me? Sorry, go ahead.
Does the general fund balance also apply to MIDA funds, including because MIDA split between development and service, which is really general funds? Do they get lumped together? I didn't see anything in regards to that.
No, it's a good question about the other political subdivisions, and it's why I mentioned that the next step of this conversation up here at the Capitol is going to be school districts, special districts, maybe the other state authorized districts. There's been a lot of focus this session around MIDA, around the Inland Port, around Point of the Mountain, and there's going to be more statutory oversight of all of those entities going forward. I think for now, this is where the bill is more focused on counties and cities and towns. But again, this is the first of what I anticipate will be multiple bills in this general space in the next year or two.
Hi, Michelle Stallings from Lehigh City. I have a comment and then a question.
Yep.
First, the comment is our fund balance. We actually looked at it a year ago and did an analysis and determined, if there's an economic downturn, a major natural disaster, we would need 30%. So we self-imposed that as our cap versus the 35. And so now with, our budget over 60 million, we're going to be limited to 25 million. This kind of thing is best left to cities, in my opinion, and probably everybody else is here. We can make those determinations. We like to spend money when we can, but we do need to keep a hold of it. So totally oppose this bill. Second is a question about tangible personal property in regards to new growth. And, in Lehigh and Eagle Mountain, where we have data centers, the Texas Instruments, they're in RDAs. That personal property is a huge part of the property revenue. And especially in regards to the TIF that they are receiving in the RDA, is that going to affect them at all? And then is it going to affect cities when those RDAs roll off and we can start collecting that tax revenue?
Thank you, Councilmember. On the second piece, I got your email about, and this is line 710 in the bill. And that was part of the meeting we had this morning with UAC, was to make sure we understood how that provision would work. So I'll let Roger address it, but just so I know, I did get it and we did follow up on it this morning.
New growth has not been part of the new growth, or personal property has not been part of the new growth calculation for a decade. So, yeah, I mean, there is nothing in the new growth calculation language that is not the current law. Now, you may have interpretations that are different. There was a big battle about 10 years ago when we took new growth out. So bear in mind, not counting it as new growth doesn't mean it's exempt. It's still taxed. It's just not, I call it truth and taxation free money, but it's still taxed. But it has not been part of that calculation for quite a while.
So the other piece from the conversation with UAC this morning was that with this language, at the expiration of the project area, no new growth, but it incentivizes renewing the project area. That was their interpretation of it as well.
So one question I have is, with the definition of new growth, it needs to be looked at what impact it will have on CRAs, TIFs, and inland ports.
So the question, in case anybody didn't hear it, was the impact of the calculation of new growth on CRAs, inland ports, and the other tax increment rules, right? That was your question. And that's what we've been trying to work on with UAC over the last month or so. And our understanding is that this new growth language simply clarifies how they're currently calculating new growth. It's not actually a policy change. Is that, I mean, that's been really the takeaway, Roger, in our conversations with UAC.
I'll admit it's a
Or-
new growth is sort of like this magic formula, and it's less obscure than it used to be. But the truth of the matter is, yes, we may have some differences of interpretation in counties, and this clears some of that up, like the double counting, et cetera. But for the most part, this is how it's been done for quite a while.
Perfect. Thank you, Roger. Thank you for the questions. Any other thoughts or questions? Mayor Ramsey, Mike, or wherever the microphone is.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's worked really hard, who reached out to their senators, and also who put in a lot of grind on Friday. There were a handful of people that were working like crazy on this to get it to a more reasonable third sub. Thank you. This is very different from where it started, and it's been a lot of work for a lot of people. And so you know who you are, and I want to say thank you for helping reach this point. Because as of Friday afternoon, I thought we were in big trouble. So this looks like you found a reasonable compromise, and I appreciate that.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. So before we move on, again, our staff recommendation is to go from oppose on the second sub to neutral on the third sub. And so we do the vote, we'll do the ratification at the end, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear, like that's the recommendation. So if there's a disagreement on that, like now's the time to voice that. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next tax bill.
Just one quick question. I guess in my mind, it all hinges on what kind of an assurance can we get that it will get cleaned up in the next few years, as Seth suggested earlier. Because fundamentally, that is a big problem for us. We have BNC road funds that gets distributed to us in June. We have sales tax that don't come until the end of August. I mean, if you have a big boon of a big development activity or something in June and July, you could have potentially a lot of revenue that gets wiped off the books. So how confident are you that the Senate and those that are in leadership will honor the agreement to come back and fix this so that we're not just getting jacked over the back fence because of bad policy being written today, even though it's not implemented for 5 years?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think when we go upstairs, because they're waiting for our answer now. So like this is the peak opportunity for us to go up and say, we can get to neutral with these assurances. And then just lay them out as we've talked about in this meeting, because this meeting has raised additional key points. And to me, the key points, and maybe I'll summarize it just so we're all clear of what I mean when I say additional key points, is first, the reconcile. Where's the camera, by the way? Because I'm looking back that way, but I don't want to.
You keep looking forward, Ken.
Okay.
We got you.
Yeah, don't throw anything at me from back there. But one, how do we figure out the property tax piece 5 years from now and the certified tax rate in light of the fact that B&C money and sales tax money often comes in later and has to be reconciled? So figuring out what that mechanism actually looks like. Again, it's 5 years from now, but that needs to be addressed. Number two, recognizing that there are still questions around the new growth definitions, and that our understanding is that the new growth definitional changes here don't change policy, they just clarify policy. And if that turns out not to be the case, then we want to revisit that as we go forward. And then I think the third piece is we've built out this sliding scale in the spirit of collaboration with the different stakeholders up there, but recognizing that over the course of the next few years, we may need to revisit the specifics of that sliding scale. Mayor Judkins. So those would be the three things that I've heard messaging wise.
And I just wanted to finish with kind of the last follow-up question, because I think there's some that are still concerned about this. What is the likelihood of us being successful if we were to say, no, we want to try and oppose this? Because I think that's going to be a really impossible lift from my perspective. And I'd like to know what staff thinks is if there's another, is there another option? Because I don't know that there is one, but I suspect some people are asking that question.
So the likelihood if we were just to oppose the bill? Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking that question, because that gets to the political question here. Is senators have heard loud and clear from us. They've also told us that they wanted to find a reasonable path forward. So it wasn't that they were a hard no, period, end of story. It was that bill goes too far, come up with a reasonable approach. This is the reasonable approach that the senators brought forward based on the conversations with the league officers. So I think you could see a lot of senators who would say, this feels reasonable. Why are cities still pushing back on it? And I think that could end up negatively impacting our ability to push back on other bills down the stretch this week and to have the conversations in the interim.
Thank you.
Mayor Judkins.
I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this and the compromises. I am very concerned as a city that has over 50% rentals, and a lot of those are, most of them are student rentals that are very difficult to afford. We have seniors in rentals that have a hard time affording the rentals. I'm worried about the exemption piece, whatever, that they will have to pay more in the property tax, because that just gets passed on to the people who are renting. And so that's the part that bothers me.
No, and Mayor, I hear that issue. We as a league have not weighed in one way or the other on that issue through the different iterations of the bill. So it's a fair point, particularly for cities that have higher amounts of rental. And I think this is why other stakeholders have been pushing back on that provision, is because the risk is that that impact will just get passed on to the person who's renting and therefore make those housing units less affordable. The question is, from a league perspective, we haven't really talked about that with the senator. Our focus has been more on the budgeting pieces. So I am anxious about going back upstairs to the league officers and saying, now we want to talk about this other piece. No, that's great. Oh yeah, no, that's fine. Yep, yep. Mayor, Mike, we got it.
I'll just say, as being in the room in these negotiations, going back to McKay scares me. I think he wanted to go below 25% across the board. You saw his reaction when we put this sliding scale out. It wasn't good. Yeah. He would wanted to be below 25% on everything. If we go back on that, I think we're in trouble. I think because he had support from his caucus to do the interest piece. We negotiated that out. I would just beg people to understand there's been a negotiation here. There's been a compromise here. We don't love it, but it could get worse for us in a lot of ways if we go back and push back on this. I really, truly believe it'll get worse for us.
I want to echo Mayor Palmer's comments and really give a shout out to him as one of our lead negotiators with Senator McKay, along with our league staff. I don't think there's a lot for us to like in this bill. But this is the sausage part of the process. There has been just overwhelming sentiment in both the House and the Senate this year that property tax is a problem, and it is hurting the affordability of our state. And we have been lucky that they have identified cities as the least bad child of the political subdivisions. And so we have had a seat at the negotiating table throughout the process. And our ideas have been at least discussed and negotiated on. And it is not just, I would want to point out to this group, it is not just actually the legislators that are applying this pressure to us that they feel come from their constituency. There are actually other entities, banks and credit unions in particular, that have been making noise that we are holding too much money in our reserve funds, that they feel like should be put to use in the economy, or at the very least invested in their fine institutions. And so it is not just this negotiation with legislators that we are frankly engaged in. We are fighting kind of a multi-pronged and multi-front battle on this issue. And I really do want to shout out, Cameron has made many spreadsheets and graphics. Many of you have contributed on short notice, data that we have used to effectively push back. I don't know if Senator McKay will have the votes to get this across the line. It may still face significant hurdles, but my belief is that we have probably gotten to a point where we are, as we like to say, comfortably uncomfortable. And if it does not pass, I'm confident that something next session will come back, and we will probably start in a much different position. So would urge everyone to think about it from kind of those two different lenses of knowing that we are dealing with not just our legislative counterparts, but we're dealing with other additional entities that are applying pressure, and that this issue of property tax won't be going away. It'll come up every year as entities go through truth in taxation and as we continue to face just affordability challenges in our state.
Go ahead, Mayor Elder.
Can we have some kind of an off-ramp here for cities that might have to go over the 25%?
So right now.
So it looks like a hard and fast rule. So if somebody can come with the recommendation that they've got a reason that they need to go over the 25%, could we at least have an off-ramp for that?
It's a good point, and I remind all of us that the limit 6 years ago was 25%. Right now, it's come up, and again, the angst is that we got all this money during COVID, and people have saved it rather than invested it. And there's the angst about the fund balance, there's the angst about property tax, and we've gone from talking about caps, and we've gone from talking about voter approval to now talking about what should the reasonable limit be on fund balance. Right now, under current law, if Providence City were to go over 35%, it would show up in your audit, and you would need to address it that way. So basically what this bill would do is lower it a little bit and then say 5 years from now, then there's that property tax piece, and there's considerable angst about that piece. Like, I think that's something we can continue to push on, whether it's this bill or in future bills. I do think the response back, if we were to ask for some sort of off-ramp, is they'll say, well, you didn't need an off-ramp 6 years ago when the fund balance was 25%. So why do you need an off-ramp now? So a lot of senators, as we've talked about the 25%, they said, well, that worked pre-COVID. Why can't it work now?
Cameron,
Yep.
Mike Winder, Mill Creek. Does this, well, we do have a bit of an off-ramp because we have till 2031. And as I read the bill, it doesn't do anything to affect your capital improvement fund.
That's right.
And so let's say you're using your fund balance to save up for a capital project. What it really does is just require you to have that 5-year plan and put in your capital improvement plan, which some of us should probably be doing more of anyway. And so it doesn't preclude saving for kind of a big project coming down the pike in capital improvements.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I mentioned that before, but part of the dialogue this session has been to put additional caps on the capital improvement, on the capital projects fund, and this bill is silent on that. So we were able to fight that piece off too, so that you still have that outlet. So I think, Mayor, that would be the other answer, is that if Providence is at that cap, well, look at your capital projects fund and look for a way you can dedicate the money that way. I wouldn't say name it something different, because once it goes in capital projects, you can't really bring it back. But part of the back and forth up here, as we've talked with legislators, it's been this tug of war versus how much should you charge now and save later to pay as you go for projects versus having a low property tax today and then bond. Like, that's the tug of war that you all face in your cities every day. And that's been part of the dialogue up here too. So I still have a whole nother page of bills here, but this has been a terrific discussion. Again, our staff recommendation is to go to neutral on the third sub with those three caveats that I mentioned a moment ago.
Cameron, sorry, just one last comment. I think the understanding the politics as has been shared is really important, and keeping in mind the dynamics that we have as we manage our budgets is really helpful. As you just described, the fund balance of the general fund can do a lot of things, but it doesn't need to do all things. And so I do have the ability to save money in my CP funds that doesn't have a cap. And so I don't have to have all of the money in the general fund all the time or only. And so as we look at these caps, a new cap of the general fund, I don't have to look at this as this is the limit to all the money that as a city I can save for a specific project. If I have specific projects in mind, I can put that in a capital projects fund and remove it from the rainy day fund limit that might be 25, 28, or 30%, as this outlines in 5 years. So I think we've been given a great runway, as you've described, to identify what our challenges might be and to work on it if we have it. And we have time next year to resolve the issues I think that we've brought up. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Seth. Final comments before we move on with the staff recommendation of neutral. Okay. So that's what the bill track will say when we do the ratification vote at the end. That's what it'll say. And obviously we'll be revisiting as we go along. House Bill 236, this is Representative Karen Peterson's Truth in Taxation Bill. The main update here is that there's a substitute we were working on over the weekend. And I mentioned that table a second ago where it'll lay out the different changes to the process. And again, you think back to where we started on the session. We started with voter approval for property tax increases. We started for caps on how much you could raise the property tax. Where we're going to end up here is the 5-year runway for modification on fund balance with some additional transparency in the process around truth and taxation. So I think really important to recognize where we started versus where we've ended up. The main takeaways here, Gary Hill presented this 2 weeks ago at LPC, and we've just been trying to get the language right around doing the impact statement that shows what the proposed tax increase would do, having the public meeting that the council does between May 1st and June 13th, and then also having some additional announcement requirements for the budget officer or mayor, depending on your form of government, if the budget officer or mayor is proposing a truth in taxation or a property tax increase and starting the truth in taxation process. And there will be a 1-year grace period for these provisions. So if Cameron City, we're going through it this year and made some good faith mistakes, that would not disqualify you from having your certified tax rate go up. It would basically be a warning rather than a ticket. And then next year, we will have learned through those examples, and then it'll be binding like the rest of the truth and taxation processes. So we're working to neutral on this bill as well. And she's waiting to meet with us this afternoon to go through those final red lines to match what is described up here. Any final questions on 236? Casper?
Question I have, Mike, is if you're planning to put a bond on your ballot and that would come at an election time, how would you include that in your, because you could have a tax increase, you'd have a budget that includes a tax increase, one that doesn't include a tax increase, and one that also, if a bond passes through a ballot, you'll have to increase your you'll increase your budget for that. How
Sure.
would you make up for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now, the bill is silent on that piece. So my first blush thought would be, it would just be situation normal unless you're contemplating an increase in property tax to pay back the bond. And if you are, then that would go into the impact statement where you could say, we anticipate raising property taxes by X amount to pay for this bond. And then this bond is going to pay to repave the roads on the west side of town. How, whatever the bond is for, that's what would show up in the impact statement.
Almost like you would have to prepare 3 budgets.
No, the whole intent here has not been to have to prepare budgets. It's been to prepare an impact statement that shows the benefit of the tax increase.
But the
And
way
so
I read the bill is you have to operate as though you didn't get the
So
increase from
interim
July
budget,
1st
July
to-
1st until your August hearing. So you do an interim budget,
Okay.
but the interim budget, when you pass the interim budget at the end of June, that interim budget contemplates the higher tax rate.
Okay.
That higher tax rate, let's say it generates $500,000 for Kaysville, you would basically put the equivalent of $500,000 into a separate budgeting fund and say, this $500,000 we're not spending yet while we are going through the truth and taxation process. And then once you go through truth and taxation process, then you release that $500,000 back. And the impact statement describes what you would do with the
But
$500,000.
then in November, say we have a fire station on the ballot, which is going to increase it another $1 million a year to cover that cost of that bond.
Mhm.
Would we not include that in also?
So to me, that would still be part of that original impact statement.
Okay.
That the impact statement would lay out, here's what you're getting for the property tax increase. So any other questions on this front? Carson, go ahead online.
You may want to address this in a moment, but there's a question online about whether HB 236 and HB 365 might be combined into the same bill.
Yep, I'm coming to that. Okay, so again, working to neutral here. The red line we were working on over the weekend hopefully has the final clarifications. SB 238, this is also in the truth and taxation space. This bill actually has not changed over the last few weeks. We had suggested some amendments, and Senator Wilson asked to put those amendments in Karen Peterson's bill so that he didn't have to substitute his bill in the process. And we said, okay. And so there are a couple amendments in Karen Peterson's bill that will reflect the requests that we had in this bill. This bill came out of the experience last summer when the 20+ cities did not get their tax increases certified. And the language came from the tax commission based on feedback from a variety of stakeholders. There are still amendments I think we'll want to try to make next year, where we'll be able to get to yes with Senator Wilson, Representative Peterson, and others. We put that language into the House Bill 236 red line from this weekend.
Hey, Cam, some questions on this 236 or HB 236. The timing doesn't work. We don't even get our valuation notices until the first or second week of June.
Right.
And trying to have that in a statement and it's like Seth talked about earlier, we guess the best that we can, but until we have that information, how do we know what that increase is and how do we know what the percentage is? And then can somebody come back and say, hey, you said it was only going to be 2% and it's 4%, but we didn't know because we didn't have the information.
Yeah, thank you, Norman. We went through those exact concerns with Representative Peterson. So I'll address each of them here. First, if you look on the slide of 2A and 2B, the key word there is approximate. We negotiated that word intentionally because Norm's right. During May and early June, you don't have final data. What she was trying to accomplish was additional transparency to the public prior to August that the city is considering a property tax increase. So considering doesn't mean ultimately adopting, because considering means here's the information we have, we're considering it, and then we're going to make a decision later in June. But she wanted to have enough time between when you announce that you're considering the approximate amount and when you adopt the what we've now termed the interim budget, for the public to weigh in and say, okay, Santaquin City, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? So this language, the approximate language, does not lock Santaquin or anybody else into a specific amount. So if through the process, Cameron City starts by, and the budget officer recommends, which you have to do under state law by the first meeting in May anyway, if the budget officer says, we recommend a 7% property tax increase. Well, the council has now taken control of the budget at that point, and the council may start at 7% or the council may start at 0%. Either way, it's now in the hands of the council. So we have been trying throughout this bill to preserve the policymaking authority of the council to determine where they go. The June 13th date was to try to get past new growth, which comes in supposedly by June 8th, but as many of you know, it doesn't always hit that date. But to get the new growth data and as much info as possible so that the city can announce to the public, we're considering the tax increase and approximately it's going to be this, but it does not lock the city in until you get to the interim budget and you adopt the interim budget. The second thing I'll note about it is that House Bill 365 actually would have locked us in, because House Bill 365 in its original form, it's been crossed out here because we've negotiated this out of the bill. This would have said that if in Cameron City, the executive officer or the mayor proposed a tax increase of 7%, then that would have locked the council and the council could not have gone above that number. And he has taken that out of the bill because of our pushback. So instead, his language is still focusing on notifying the tax commission by May 1st. Current law requires June 1st, so we wanted to move that up by a month. And again, you can see we've outlined the problems with that timing. So what we have been discussing with him is, and this is in the red lines from the weekend as well, that if the budget officer or mayor proposes a tax increase, then you state that in the public notice for that first meeting in May, and you post it on the website for 7 days, or if you don't have a website, at City Hall. So that way you're achieving the objective of more transparency to the public earlier in the budget process, that we're considering the tax increase, but it doesn't lock anybody in, and you don't have to do the impact. Well, there's the budget officer does the impact statement based on the budget officer's recommendation, but the impact statement that the council ultimately adopts comes with the interim budget. So, yeah, great question. Any other? Kyle? Mike? Go to Kyle.
So the current process, we set a maximum allowable rate with the tentative budget. Is that still part of the interim budget where we're setting a maximum allowable rate?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you're
That
going,
won't
so if
change.
West Point was going through truth and taxation this year, and you wanted to increase property tax by 7% for conversation purposes. Oh, actually, Gary, I'll let Gary talk so I can get a drink.
I think it's important to keep in mind that what you're adopting is a dollar amount, not a rate.
Yeah.
The rate is approximate. We won't know that until all
Until
of the
July,
data
yep.
comes in. So the budget is adopting a dollar amount. And so we frequently don't get our certified rate until after we adopt the final budget anyway. So what we do is we say we adopt the rate at a no tax rate increase. In this case, you would say we're adopting the budget with a $400,000 increase at a rate to be determined.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Gary, and that's why I wanted to come back here to 2A and B, which is the approximate amount, because it's all approximate through that point until you adopt your interim budget, which says we need $700,000 more than last time. And it may be approximately 7%, but you won't know exactly until July. And just, again, the amount of meetings we've had over the last few months has been pretty staggering, because what we were hoping to accomplish was to try to move up that whole truth and taxation overlay so that you weren't waiting until after your budget to know what the tax rate was going to be. And at least for this session, there was no way to change that calendar. But that is something we've asked for a deeper dive from all the different stakeholders for this coming interim. Is there a way to change that piece of the schedule so that you have the information you need prior to adopting the interim budget? But at least as of now, the answer from the tax commission has been we can't do that. Okay, there's a question online about the restricted fund piece. So Mike, can you go back to Gary? Because this is nothing we've been wordsmithing all weekend to make sure we get this right.
Yes, it's actually a restricted line in your budget. The key there is that it's in your budget. It's not an account or a fund. And so you would simply identify in your budget a line that says this money is restricted until the truth in taxation hearing takes place and the council makes whatever decision they are.
Great. So one of our training topics starting next week is going to be property tax because of all the moving pieces. But I do want to point out that the league board adopted a principle for us at the beginning of the session about preserving the authority of city councils to make decisions on property tax, to increase taxes if necessary. And I think despite all the moving pieces on property tax, like we have achieved that objective. Will there be more steps to the process? Yes. Are there going to be more opportunities for transparency? Yes. Is there angst around fund balance? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, we preserve that fundamental authority for your cities and your policymakers, your city councils, to make those decisions without those additional constraints that have been under consideration and have passed in other states. So again, property tax, it's not just angst in Utah. It's happening all over the country. And I mentioned this at an LPC in the fall, but the Wyoming legislature cut property tax statewide by 25% by all taxing entities. And the state of Wyoming does not impose a property tax. So they just simply said, all of the taxing entities figure out a 25% cut. That's what they did. And those types of bills have been advancing in other legislatures around the country. Where we've ended up has been in the process and fund balance space. Okay. Almost done on the tax piece, and then we got a lot to still get through, so hang with us here. But those were great questions and great dialogue. House Bill 231, I've gotten a lot of messages about this bill, particularly from rural Utah. It's been in rules up until this morning, and then it passed out of committee 5-3, and this would basically repeal the TRCC, which is a county tax. So UAC has been taking the lead on it. We're opposed to it as well, but it is a county tax that they're looking to repeal. Okay, House Bill 514. I'm going to jump into energy here. Mike Squire still here? Okay, great. As Mike comes up, this is another interesting bill that came up on the radar on Thursday. It is 1:30, and we have to get to the housing land use bills because there's been some moving pieces there. And then I'm just scanning the rest of the agenda. We need to do an update on 88 and what happened there as well. So our ask is to hang with us. We scheduled till 1:45. Last week we went till 2:10. Let's split the difference, go till 2. Mike, come on up. So House Bill 514 came on our radar last Thursday afternoon with a substitute. Substitute came out at about 4:30, and then the House passed it at 7:30. Since then, we've been meeting with the bill sponsor and others to try to understand what this bill means for cities in general, but particularly for municipal power cities. So with that, I'll introduce Mike Squires from UAMPS, who's one of our great partners, and let you take a moment, maybe 5 to 7 minutes. Does that work? Great. Okay, then even shorter if necessary.
Awesome. Thanks again for your time. Mike Squires with UAMPS. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, as Cam mentioned, procedurally, right now, we have the first substitute. We had a floor amendment to the bill, and let me just step back real fast before I get into the substance. So right now, the big question is that we're still working with the sponsor on language. We've had multiple meetings Thursday, Friday, and even up until today. We left not having a clear resolve, but the origins of this bill have a nexus to the Intermountain Power Plant. The state had wanted to find a way to be able to issue bonds for that project specifically, and the first substitute creates this special service district concept. What it does is it allows for the State Energy Council, which is a body of 5 individuals, 2 appointed by the governor, director of the Office of Energy Development, and then 1 from the House and 1 from the Senate. They are tasked as the governing board of the special district. Again, the special district construct came into play because the state, in concert with the treasurer's office, bond council, determined that they couldn't issue and didn't want a general obligation bond issued by the state. So they came up with this construct. Why does this matter? It matters because the overlapping, you can have this district that is determined, the boundaries of this district that is determined by the State Energy Council, and those boundaries can overlap with municipalities. For us, as a representative of municipally owned electric utilities, we were obviously deeply concerned with how that might impact our retail service territory, our respective certificated service territory. For our membership, the same concern was there also at play with the co-ops and Rocky Mountain Power. So all three organizations, along with the Special Service Districts Association, have been following this bill, and we have been providing input. We got a floor amendment, so going back to sort of where it was procedurally, on Friday or Thursday afternoon, we got a floor amendment to clarify that, of course, this would not enable the Special Service District to provide retail service to customers already served by one of the 3 or 4 entities in the state that I just mentioned a second ago. So we were very grateful to have that language. Also, another sort of belt and suspenders language that we included in there is if there were ever a conflict between what's here in this proposed language and what is in Title 10 as it relates to the governance of municipally owned electric utilities, that Title 10 would govern. So good news there. It alleviated some of the initial stress that I had over this bill. There are still some residual issues as to how some of the nuanced hypotheticals could play out and how they might adversely impact municipally owned electric utilities. Like I said, right now, the latest is that we're still working through some of that and working through potential alternatives with the bill sponsor. So as of right now, we've maintained a really good open dialogue with Representative Walter, and we are seeking to, I mean, if it were my way, we wouldn't have this bill together. I think that's a shared concern across all 3 organizations. But here we are, and right now, the latest is that we are trying to ensure that, of course, too, the Special Service District's powers do not supersede those of Title 10 entities, including, say, for example, if the Special Service District did anticipate wanting to develop a generation asset, think of a coal plant, natural gas plant, solar facility, within the respective boundaries of a municipality, that they would have to, pursuant to, Article 11, Section 9 of the state constitution, get the consent of the municipality. So there are some checks in play already in the language that we're really pleased with. We hope that we can work with the bill sponsor to make it even better. Again, we'd like to see this perhaps studied in interim. There's a lot at play that we're walking through, but that's the high level summary. And I'm wanting to be, of course, conscious of how much time you guys have. So
We have a lot of questions. And
Yeah.
Mike may not be able to answer them.
yes, Sean.
Special service districts have a lot of authority. That's where this bill, I think, is a little unclear because they can condemn, they have power of eminent domain, they can tax, they can expand their boundaries. So, but those are derivative from the agencies that create them, the entities that create them. In this case, it's kind of a different animal, and you've got the board in the mix. How do we know that we're not going to have a special district that's created, and then later on, they want to tax. Later on, they want to expand their boundaries. Later on, they want to condemn property within our jurisdictions, because that is the part of this bill that's unclear.
Great question. I'm happy to relay those back to the bill sponsor. As of right now, the bonds would be general revenue bonds. I think there's still, like we've highlighted today with Representative Walter, a number of scenarios that I don't think he contemplated as to how this could be detrimental to municipal interests. And I could run through some of those right now. But yeah, we're certainly concerned with that. And then just at a high level, this is a significant material departure from the course of business for the state, in that they are seeking to, and have said multiple times, that they would like to begin to own energy generating assets. So I never thought in Utah we'd have a state legislature wanting to actively go out and purchase and own a natural gas plant or a coal facility. So there are some philosophical concerns there. I think the governor's office has relayed that they do not want the state to own infrastructure like this. And we're seeking to, of course, Sean, narrow some of its applicability in the sense that, for example, right now, the door is open to a third-party operator we have said that if, in so much as you have the language where, protect certificated service territory, the operators themselves should be limited to those who have the right to serve those customers as well. And maybe there's a right of first refusal. I'm not sure exactly how that will come into play, but great question.
I think while we have time for one more question, while we're doing Slido, we got one final Slido on this one. So Mike, don't run too far in case anyone has a question, because I am definitely not going to be able to answer it. We have some online. Okay. HB 514.
The question online is, where is the funding coming from to repay the bonds? Is it property tax charged to the property owners, or is it a different tax revenue?
Be a revenue bond. And then those operating the facility, just for clarification, the council could impose a privilege tax on those operating the facility up till, I think there's a ceiling of 0.0023. Oh, sure. Thanks, Mayor. Power revenue bonds would be the bond itself would be repaid through the sale of that energy that's produced at the facility. So for example, it's predicated on, of course, this facility generating power, and there's an output, and the money that's derived from the sale of those electrons, really, the power, would go back to repay the bonds. And that would be how it would work. How the special service district boundaries would be designated would be, for example, if you had a data center, let's say in city X, I would anticipate that would be the beneficiary of course, this bonding mechanism that the state's establishing, and that would then be the revenue that would go back to repay those bonds. If that made sense, I hope that did. Okay.
All right, we've got to jump to a lot of other things. You notice at the end of our agenda it says rapid fire updates. We should have moved that up about 10 spaces because that's going to be everything. Yeah, Mike, thank you for that. Watch for updates on this one. We're going to jump over to, we broke 100, housing and land use, which normally we spend most of the time at LPC, and it's been like a side quest this year.
Yeah, perfect. That's because we've been able to kill off a lot of bad bills. Thanks to those of you who participated in the Land Use Task Force, as well as to our LPC Housing Advisory Subgroup. So we went back through the calendar invites, and these are everybody who attended at least one of our housing subgroup meetings over the last few months. And it's been really, really helpful to be able to run things through this group. And some of these folks are no longer in office because this group met through last year. The last meeting was right before the session, but I just wanted to say thank you. Hopefully we captured everybody who participated in some form or fashion, as well as league board members who are involved in that housing advisory subgroup. So one thing, the reason I bring this up is that starting as soon as later this month, we will have questions from legislators about next year. Last year, the session ended on a Friday, like it always does. The following week, I was in meetings with leadership as they were starting to lay out the plan of attack for the next year. Okay, so the session will end Friday at midnight, and then later this month, we'll be back at it. And so last year, we put together an advisory subgroup on housing and land use. We'll likely do that again this year. And then there will be other subgroups we'll put together. Just in today's meeting alone, we've talked about homelessness. I anticipate we'll have the formal task force that's in House Bill 596, but we'll also have other subgroups as things get going and we get the lay of the land through the spring. So thank you to everybody who participated here. So House Bill 492, this came through us. I just wanted to make sure everybody remembered this because this is actually a great bill that started at the league 3 years ago, and the board has prioritized it every year, and it's almost across the finish line. This is the bill that is going to set aside $100 million from the state for infrastructure loans. And then it's in the well, you actually don't need, the homework there is outdated because that was last week. Now it's over to the Senate and it's moving through the Senate. I mentioned that Representative Roberts came and presented this bill at the annual convention last fall. Here's our ask: apply for the House Bill 492 funds. We've provided a spreadsheet to state leaders with about $500 million worth of system improvements that you as cities have provided to us to help make the case for the cities or for the state partnering with local governments on infrastructure funding. So the more that you apply, there won't be money for everybody, but the more that we apply, the more we can tell that story up here for future partnerships, okay? And the whole purpose of House Bill 492 is for the state to partner with us to fund system infrastructure that can unlock housing units. So that was one piece that came through us over the last 3 years, and I'm excited to see it hopefully get across the finish line this week. Second thing, Senate Bill 284. Bear with me here, folks. I know it's late. I know you guys ate lunch. Bear with me as I walk through where things are at on the land use bills. We presented to you several weeks ago House Bill 477. House Bill 477 is being merged today in with SB 284. Okay. That way, instead of two land use bills trying to go through the process, it's one land use bill going through the process. This is what was originally in SB 284. And this is the result of a lot of negotiations between the league side, the counties, the Property Rights Coalition, and others over the last several months. So this 1 through 6 is not new because we presented it to LPC previously, putting checklists online, the process, what happens if a planning commission does not make a timely recommendation, planning commission training on ethics and bias and avoiding impermissible bias. That's the term that actually we brought forward back a couple of months ago now to try to address the issue of perception of bias in administrative actions. Removing ability of third party to challenge a land use law, removing legislative bodies as appeal authorities so we have clear separation of powers with what the legislative body does and doesn't do, and then some definitions around development agreements. There are a couple of new provisions that have come up during the session, and they're both very narrow, but they will be in the bill, and we wanted to make sure people were aware that they're going to be put in the bill this afternoon. Number one deals with open houses and model homes. There was legislation last year that created kind of the framework for regulation around open houses. When we surveyed our members last year, basically nobody was doing any sort of the regulation. And so that bill moved forward to say you can't do this. And the vast majority of cities weren't doing anything in that space anyway. It only mentioned open houses. This ties model homes into that same framework. Okay. Again, should have very limited impact, but it's really trying to have some consistency in those definitions. The other piece that's coming in this afternoon does come from a specific fact pattern, but when there's a conflict between how a city's own regulation is regulating height and stories. So if the city's own regulation around height and stories is in conflict, and the height allows more stories than the stories language in the local ordinance allows, then state law will say you can get that additional story. So if you have, for conversation purposes, if Cameron City was allowing a building that is, say, 70 feet tall that would accommodate 6 stories, but my own ordinance says you can only have 4 stories in there. Well, that's the inconsistency. Well, you're allowing the taller building can accommodate more, so you need to accommodate more. And then this provision will have a sunset period on it as well. So I just wanted to be clear that that'll be added later this afternoon. Then House Bill 477's provisions include the changes based on the litigation in West Hills, some clarifications to 2 bills last year that were really heavy lifts. And then as we've been implementing them, recognized we need to make some additional modifications. And then the detached ADU language that we started negotiating back in June, and I got to work to a spot where the LPC was comfortable. We did that all through the fall, and ultimately the new substitute will have that 10,000 square foot lot size, which was based on all the feedback from UB Slido, was the line in the sand issue for us, as well as sufficient infrastructure and setbacks and the like. So all of that is going to be in the substitute, but I just wanted to make sure everybody within the sound of my voice knew that 477 and 284 are going to be merged into one bill, and these are the provisions that are going to be in it. Again, because there's been work done on this for months, our recommendation is to support the bill. There are things in there that are really good for us. There are things in there that don't necessarily like, but it's all part of kind of the grand bargain as you're working through lots of really complicated land use issues. And in the spirit of collaboration, our recommendation is to support this bill. We've been position pending on it while we were waiting for the sub. I don't know if the sub's yet public or not because we were working on it over the weekend, but the sub should reflect what we've just described. It's not public yet. Yeah. So that's why I just want to make it clear our recommendation was to support because we expect it will have what we just described. Questions, thoughts, feedback? Lynn.
Just question on the effective date of the bill. I understood there was a delayed effective date for the detached
There is,
ADUs.
yes.
Is that the whole bill or
Nope,
just that piece?
detached ADU delayed effective date till October. So that mirrors the bill from several years ago because really what this does is it requires the city to have an ordinance. And then you pass the ordinance and it's going to look a little different in Sandy than it does in Helper, than it does in Provo, than it does in Woods Cross. So you have to have the ordinance. And as a reminder, the majority of our cities already have these ordinances in place. So for those cities, it's probably a tweak here or a tweak there. For the cities that don't have them in place, we wanted to have enough of a runway to decide what makes sense for your community. Any questions online, Cassidy, on this one? Okay, House Bill 597. This is another bill that popped out last week that is a culmination of several years of effort, and this is around alcohol proximity. You can see current law up on the screen that right now you cannot have an alcohol license within 300 feet of a community location. And for those of us who've been around a while, we'll remember that a decade ago it was 600 feet, but there was a process to waive that down to 200 feet. And that process, the legislature eliminated 2017. Like I said, okay, not quite a decade ago, 9 years ago. So since that time, you've had this 300-foot limit. And that's been a major limiting factor, particularly in older Main Street, historic downtown areas where you may have a park or a city hall or other community locations, okay? What this bill now does is it says for certain types of community locations, libraries, playgrounds, or parks, there is a path to overcome the 300-foot proximity requirement. You have, and it's only for full service, limited service, and beer-only restaurants and hotels. Okay, so it's not for bars, but it's for that particular type of licensee. So the local government, Cameron City, has to hold a public meeting, take public comment, at least, and do that at least 30 days before the local government submits a request to DAVS, and then DAVS can choose whether or not to accept it. Our recommendation is support, and in fact, we've already testified in support because we've spent several years on this proximity piece and supported it last year. It wasn't quite like this, but it was very similar to this, and that failed the last week of the session. So this one, I think, has a better chance of passage. Any questions on alcohol proximity here? It's fixed.
Is that yeah.
So it specifically says, I listed this in the positive. The way the bill reads is the negative and says that schools and churches cannot go through this process. So if St. George City wanted to go through this process, you cannot do it for schools and churches. You can for everything else. Yep. Any other questions? Carson, do you want to be the bearer of good news on this one?
All right, so House Bill 436 has been a ways coming. Again, we've been positioned pending up to this point because we've been working on some conversations behind the scenes. So what the bill will do, how it kind of started was giving priority consideration. So within MIHP, if you do the minimum number of strategies, you're compliant and you are eligible for projects to be funded by the Transportation Investment Fund. If you are, if you have more strategies than are required, then you can be prioritized for projects. It's not a huge shift for the Transportation Commission to or a huge priority for them, but it is a factor for them to consider. So that's consistent with MIHP 2.0. We've been working through some technical details on that, but generally we think is kind of in the space of the MIHP 2.0 concept we've been discussing. The MIHP 2.0 concept, and there was a question about this online earlier. I think we spent a lot of time through a housing advisory work group trying to get together some coherent policy for this, trying to make MIHP more objective, a better process for local governments, less burdensome for reporting. Since House Bill 68 is reorganizing all the state housing agency efforts under one roof, the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, or under a new bill, it'll go back to GOED, fun fact. So because of all those changes, we felt like it was a little bit premature to create MIHP 2.0 since there wasn't really a clear landing place for it and the agency was still getting up and running. So what this bill will do in the first substitute is it will freeze MIHP for 2026. So you do not need to submit MIHP reports for 2026. If you were eligible last year, all entities were eligible, or prioritized, then you would be in the 2025 reports, then you will maintain that status through 2026, which will give us time working with the new Office of Housing or the new Division of Housing in GOEO. Then yeah, you'll maintain that status basically. One important piece is while you won't be required to submit MIHP reports this summer, you will be required on July 1st to report the number of residential units issued certificates of occupancy. This has been a priority metric for the state housing plan. We expect there to be more clarification around what parameters, whether it's broken down by single and multifamily in administrative rule once that agency gets, or that division gets underway in May. So are there any questions? The general takeaway is we'll make sure that you're aware of what when the reporting deadlines are for those certificates of occupancy, but overall, you don't need to worry about an MIHP report this summer. I appreciate the slow claps there. Thank you. All right. If you have any questions about MIHP, let me know. We'll continue working on the 2.0 concept with the advisory group, and I'll turn it over to Jared.
Thanks, Carson. If your city is on this list, last week I had said Weber County only. If your city is on this list, would you raise your hands? Cool beans. All right. If you raise your hands, come and talk to me, and we can talk about this. This will now apply definitely to Davis County and Weber County. We're trying to make it palatable for those cities that are in Utah County. So we're still working on that. Just got a text from the legislator on this. So we'll be working on that. And if you could just come and talk to me and we can work through those things. Okay.
We're going to fly through stuff here. If you see something, you're like, man, I really wish they would have spent time on that. Come grab us after. We're going to fly through some things here because a lot of things. So this one really quick. So law enforcement usage of unmarked vehicles. I'm putting this one on your radar. It got out of committee. It is on the House or Senate currently circled. Law enforcement, the chiefs, LALC have been working with the sponsor to try to get this better. It may not get better. We may just be opposed to this thing, which is fine. So I'm just putting this one on your radar that we may have an action alert go out on this one. So stay tuned. But just says you can't use unmarked vehicles for traffic stops. And there's some problems with that. So stay tuned. There may be an action alert on this one if we can't find a resolution. Public assistance. All right, we brought this one up last week. HB 88, this is Trevor Lee's bill prohibiting or limiting public assistance use for undocumented individuals. There was a seventh sub that came out on HB 88. The seventh sub was folded into HB 386, which is a completely separate bill. So we don't expect 88 to move anywhere anymore because that language is now in 386. Here's what we need to be aware of. One, the underlying bill deals with repealing the guest worker program and the Utah Pilot-Sponsored Resident Immigrant Program Act. What was folded in that would have previously been in 88 was a lot of that assistance language was clarified down. The added citizen check required for home loans guaranteed by the VA or FHA, a license required by Department of Commerce or higher education assistance. That is what it limited it down to. So most of our concerns, the infraction concerns, the right of action, that stuff is gone. So with this bill as it is, we're kind of just monitoring it at this point. But we'll see where it goes. So that one, we spent a lot of time talking about it last week. A lot of the most egregious portions are gone, and the vast majority, if not all of what we cared about, has been removed from that bill moving forward. Yes, and yeah, should know that when the bill came up the next day after LPC on the floor, it was circled. Oh yeah, that's right, it was that afternoon. So that afternoon after LPC, it's like, time is relative up here. But then that afternoon, a lot of concerns from cities on that one, and they did circle the bill over those concerns. So again, League Army did your job and made a difference there. All right, water. We talked about this one last week. The sub came out and did what we thought it would do. So I'll highlight the things that changed in the sub. One, it clarified that there is not a rate increase that necessarily would happen. It would say that you would have to have an amount that is calculated based on that 1.5% or 3%, but it doesn't say it would have to necessarily raise your rates to get there. Funds stay with the local system, and you would have a 2-year plan if you're going for state funds to get it there. So it's not something you would have to raise immediately either. They took a lot of those changes. They're in there. There's also an exception if you're a system with 3,300 residents or less, and you can show some hardship there to the system. With the changes that are in there, I think we're still sort of position pending to see where this goes, trending toward neutral. But if you have continued concerns with this bill, please let us know. But it is over in the Senate, and quite frankly, I do not know what the Senate's appetite is on this and many other bills. The Senate is very, very good at keeping their cards close to the vest. Let's see, transportation, a couple of bills here, SB 197, HB 586. This is a story of today. We're combined into one SB 197. So this is the one that dealt with dedicated transit transportation investment fund and the changes to the UTA governance. That's all one big bill now. And with the changes and the discussions we had on that one, we're recommending support. And yes, these are rapid fire. We're going fast. Tort reform, SB 211. We've been talking about this the whole session. And guess where it is right now? Sitting circled on the Senate board. And it's been sitting circled there for a minute. If it is uncircled, that means that the sponsor has likely got the support that he needs to move it out. Whether or not that happens is to be seen, but it's sitting in the exact same place it's been sitting for a couple of weeks now. Maybe more than a couple of weeks. Jared, anything on 450?
Yes.
Okay, I'll let you do 450.
We have yet to bring this up because it's always at the very last. So here it is. So this has gone through, as you can see, there are 5 subs on this bill. And we've moved through, if you'll see at the bottom on the left there, it says opposed sub 5. So there were some things in prior subs that have been moved out. This is one of them, truth and surveillance. So I'm just going to skip to what currently is in sub 5. They have put back in, well, in previous subs, they took out the privacy auditor altogether. Now they've put back that section as well. How many of you have been audited for privacy? Anybody? 1, 2? Okay. It's not a fun experience, and the report that they give you back is less than helpful. So we are kind of pushing back on that piece. There are, of what the bill actually does, there's not a whole lot here to be concerned about. There are the transparency study that will be done throughout the interim is done by the Commission and the Office of Data Privacy. And the report has to be submitted to the committee by November 2027. We are trying to change that to be a little bit more fair committee and input than is right now. And so everything else stays the same. The contract provisions that you've seen before, where it requires the city to provide those provisions in the contract, that the contractor will abide by the privacy laws. We no longer have to do again. It's been kicked down the road to 2027. This also limits the ombudsperson to only take those things that are not within the scope of the GRAMA, the Government Records Office, as well as the government or the GRAMA ombudsman themselves. So if you've got any questions, please let me know.
Okay, SB 232, we've amended this one significantly. So now this will be a training we'll do with the city attorneys to make sure that you add this language to your ordinances. Initially, it would have said that anytime you set a water fee, for example, you'd need to think about the impact, consider the impact on families, could have opened up a private right of action. We've solved all of that. Now it's just part of the consideration, which cities are doing anyway, of thinking about the impact on families. And then, and then I mentioned this a moment ago, But even though the session isn't over yet, this is everything that we're tracking that has already come up for the interim. And it barely fits on one slide. And inevitably, there will be bills that will die this week that will get turned into interim topics. So we showed you a few times today where we had a property tax work group and a housing work group and other things. We'll be building those out in the spring. This will be the starting point. There'll be others. We have killed a lot of bills behind the scenes this session that have never made it to the light of day. And I just want to thank our team and Mike. This was his first session with us. So, thank you, Mike. And I want to thank all of you for your contributions through the off season and during the session. We've had record participation in LPC, record participation in reopening emails, responding to League Army alerts. It has all made an incredible impact, and don't stop now. We have 4.5 more days to go, and then we'll pick up where we leave off later this month. With that, Mayor Bradshaw and Councilmember Hinton, I'll turn it back to you for ratification of recommendations or any other motions.
Before we go to the ratification of the tracker, I wanted to take a moment and just talk about our league staff. We are tracking 241 bills as the Utah League of Cities and Towns. If we expect roughly 580-ish bills to pass, we're tracking a significant amount of those. And I know that we only make it to probably 1% of those high priority bills in each of our LPC meetings that we have. But I want you to know just how much time our staff is putting into this. Cameron City might be the worst city in the state of Utah. But I can tell you that Cameron City is up every night until 2 or 3 a.m. If you haven't had the pleasure of having a text or phone conversation with Cameron in those wee hours, let me tell you that Cameron is hitting you with facts and data and spreadsheets. And I'm really blurry on some of those details, but he's not. And Cameron is not the only one. Our staff, as you can tell, you can ask them almost anything, and they know the issues, they know the bills, and so they're just so dedicated in going through all of these things. And I know sometimes we don't make it all the way through the agenda, but I want you to know that they are on top of all 241 bills that we are tracking, and they are a trusted part of every conversation that happens up here at the state capitol. We are invited to the conversations because the legislature knows that we bring good data, that we bring thoughtful analysis, that we can bring our voices, and we have shown that this year with the number of bills where we have asked you all to participate, and you have stepped up and you have done that. I also want to send out a shout out to the league board and the officers who also are putting in a significant amount of time. There's a lot of things that we are trying to have all of our fingers on so that we can make sure that what comes out of this session are policies that we can support, policies we can work on, and policies we can administer. And so this process is one where you have to be present to win and have to be present to engage. And Councilmember Hinton has been flying up from Santa Clara to be here to help be part of that process. And the voices from each of our cities are so important to making these bills better. And I just want to really stop for a moment and really just shout out our staff and our team for all the hard work they're doing. And I hope you'll join me in a round of applause for them. Thank you. And nobody get too comfortable because, as you can see from this list, we'll be back to work soon. I'm going to turn time over now to Councilmember Hinton for our tracker.
Thank you, Mayor Bradshaw. With that, I will look for a motion to ratify our bill tracker. Got a motion over here in a second. We had the second back in the back. All in favor, say aye. Oh, sorry. Oh, is there any discussion of that motion? Okay, all in favor of that motion, say, any opposed? Great, and I need another motion to adjourn. So moved, and I heard a lot of those. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.